Good evening and welcome to a Mowing After Dark on Selection Sunday on the eve of St. Patrick's Day on the 16th of March. It's 316 Day as well. If you're a Stone Cold Steve Austin fan or a Christian fan or however you want to put that, but it is 316 Day as well. Want to thank everybody for coming in here on Mowing After Dark. I am, of course, your host, Moen. And to my right is my co-host, Rock and Rant. Rock, why don't you tell them a little bit? Rock just started a new channel with our friend Miami Flow. Why don't you tell them a little bit about that channel before we get started tonight?
Yeah, man. Thank you. So we just launched. We had done a show on Flo's Miami focused channel that was national called CFB Express, and decided to move it to its own dedicated channel that is also called CFB Express. I'll drop the link in chat momentarily, and kicked it off this week. So I'd love if all of you guys would follow. It's not changing anything that I'm doing with Moen and the CFB Mafia crew at all. I'm sure there'll be some times when all of us maniacs talk about the same things, but it's like the 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. slot on the sports radio station and the 1 to 4 slot. But I think there's things that this channel does differently and analytically better than anybody. And then there's things that like the Flow is really good at on the national recruiting side, and some things like that more about like whether cover two should have been played. So there's an overlap, but there's distinction. So would love if everybody joined over and followed the accounts on Twitter, X, Twitch, whatever, YouTube. But thanks for the introduction on that and the setup, Moen. I appreciate it.
No problem at all, sir. No problem at all. Let's get some hellos. And even before we started here, Ryan Willie, the Evil Badger, for people pushing a super league, what happens if your school goes from a blue blood to a bottom feeder? Be careful of what you wish for. Moen, please ask Nate and Wild Youth that question next Friday. I kind of posed it to him this past Friday. If you watched, Ryan, listen, you're not going to be winners. I mean, if you add 40 premier brands, 20 of them are going to be mediocre. And there's really no incentive for the Big Ten to swap out their mediocre teams for another conference's mediocre teams.
Yeah, someone's always in a league of 16 or a league of 24. Someone's always got to be 24. There's always going to be that. Now, whether that brand is inherently like the biggest failing brand, so to speak, in a given year, it's really more about like are the bottom dwellers. I don't mean in terms of like the school being awesome and the fans being great. How often do they have a chance of rising to the top versus just like it's just you're in a down year? Like I don't think anybody thinks that Florida State in the ACC right now is a bottom dweller to bottom half of the conference. They just had a terrible season, right? But the odds are their resources, their focus on in football, that they'll be back up in the upper half at least, and then eventually probably back up in the top tier sooner rather than later, just historically.
Absolutely. Look at Indiana from the Big Ten this year. Perfect example. That would have been a team that everybody cut out, and they managed to make it to the college football playoff in their first 11-win season, I believe. So, very good for Indiana. Ryan, by the way, congratulations to the Lady Badgers. If they take care of business against the Golden Gophers, and my Buckeyes take care of business against Cornell, we'll see you in the championship game, brother. We'll see you in the championship game. Those Buckeyes are going back to back. And go ahead and pop this up for you, buddy. There is the evil Badger Kaiju reigning terror on Goldie the Gopher.
Oh my.
Stormy Cyclones here. Hi, guys. Pretty soon we'll have enough school and college football playoff for football bracketology.
Alabama by 20, even if they get snubbed.
In a hypothetical matchup, Alabama always wins. Almighty Finn says Notre Dame needs to be in the Big 12. Hey, maybe. Maybe. We will see. D5 Terps. Go Terps. seed. Yes, to represent the Big Ten well. We haven't had a national championship since 2002, I believe. So it would be nice to get one this year. I would also like to see Tom Izzo in Michigan State. Just
He's always an interesting personality to have out there.
and I can tell he's towards the end of his career, and I'd like to see him do it. Big 10 equals 9 in the dance. Big 12 equals 8. All I know is Ohio State ain't in because we're not a basketball school. D5 Terps, Notre Dame, Stanford to the Big. Okay. Could be. Could be. SEC at 14 seeds is pretty wild. Yeah. Yeah. What kind of world we living in now? The Big 10 is a superior football conference, and the SEC has 14 teams in the NCAA tournament. It's really cats living with dogs, mass hysteria.
Here's the thing, Mullen. If you do Greg Sankey rationale now, that must mean that the SEC should have 16 auto qualifiers in the future proportionally in basketball if you take the football methodology.
Yeah, listen, that's Greg Sankey, man. Wait till he expands. They don't want 20.
He would want 20 if they only have 18 teams. He'd want 20.
Conundrum. Notre Dame, Stanford, Duke, and Miami to the Big Ten. So you think they're stopping at 22? I think that's a
20 or 24.
Yeah, I listen, if you're stopping at 22, I will say this, those four, as Greg mentioned, all private institutions, no hangups, no backpacks, no state politics. They just can bounce. They are just like USC. They can just bounce, cut that check, bounce, and have nothing else to worry about.
Yeah, I don't see, I think it's a huge question to see how big Big Ten will go. But for some reason, 22, it's like 20, I understand. And if you go beyond that, it's 24. I just can't see 22 being a number. It's very difficult to work scheduling wise in football, especially.
Yes, and Pickles and I have been working on a scheduling matrix to show how a 24 team Big Ten would actually schedule out, and how you would basically play everybody once every 3 years. D5 Terps, my hope is that the Big doesn't wait for Notre Dame and misses out on a possible Florida State Miami combo. Only problem is Notre Dame brings that money. That's guaranteed money they know they have from Fox and the other partners if they get Notre Dame on board.
Still don't see Notre Dame coming. I just think that they're going to be the last one until they really can't schedule. And then it doesn't matter. Any SEC or Big Ten would take them as an oddball number, just like the ACC did, and they'd figure it out later.
Conundrum says the Knowles are bad neighbors. They're rich bad neighbors, though. They are rich bad neighbors. Notre Dame isn't going to the SEC. Notre Dame already on record saying that travel concerns for non-rev sports was a concern. I don't disagree with you. It's just the thumbnails pointing out that we are now in a Power 2 world, and how will Notre Dame navigate that? And Rock might be right. They may stay independent.
I also don't believe a single thing publicly that half these guys say. Like, there's sometimes a morsel of truth within there, but that's all situational truth.
Daniel Gygax is here. He says, hi, everyone. Good to see you, Daniel. Notre Dame needs to get over 100-year-old grudges. Forgive and forget already. Yeah, that's stupid. Listen, I completely understand if Notre Dame wants to stay independent, maintain the tradition. But when they bring up something that happened 100 years ago, it's dumb because, I mean, I believe they didn't even integrate their university till like 1968. I'm sure the football players are not holding that against them that are playing for them today. So it's a dumb thing to bring up in the argument. Like when a Notre Dame fan brings that up to me, I know they're an idiot. Sorry, Notre Dame fans. It's a dumb argument. You can make logical, good arguments. That's a dumb one.
Yeah, I would say the best argument you have is that you don't need to.
Yeah. That's it. Say, hey, we're rich and we got the ACC grab an ankle for us. They let us basically write our own schedule. NBC's paying us on a sliding scale. Why should we? Let's see. Conundrum says Showtime. Steel Austin. Basically, the entire SEC is in the tourney. That's amazing. Let's see how it works out for them, though. I want to see how many of those SEC teams make it to the next round and the round after that.
Yeah, I also wonder how much it's going to like the tournament's its own thing, right? It's a beast, but when you have that many teams from any conference like that, there's that many less second and third seeds from non-power four conferences that in the past might have made it, that just make it less underdog slots theoretically. I mean, there's still the automatic qualifiers in a lot of those other schools, but some of those conferences that used to go maybe a second or a third one in, or a number one seed who lost as an upset in their tournament to like the third or seventh seed in there, they don't get in because they lost the AQ. I wonder whether that impacts interest or not. Probably not, but it'll be interesting to see.
Absolutely. Caleb Ramirez is here. He says, let's go. Okay, we're going. UNC grads here. He says, go UNC. Didn't make the tournament, but they may be the winner when all this realignment settles down. They may be the winner. Daniel Gugek says, and WVU got snubbed. Welcome to the NIT. Ohio State will see you in the NIT, Daniel.
Yeah, if everybody's like all these other conferences should schedule their own separate tournament, let me know if you watch any of the NIT.
Bo Evil says, hi guys, go Clemson, Edgemore, South Carolina. All right, go Clemson. Go Tigers. Our friend Greg, he says boo, and I'm sure that's in relation to me saying that the Wisconsin Badgers need to beat the Minnesota Golden Gophers in the Frozen Four of the ladies hockey tournament so that my Ohio State Buckeyes can play Wisconsin, beat Wisconsin, and win back-to-back national championships.
It's funny. That was me today watching Greg's show when he cut the phones off before I got a chance to argue with him on unconscionability as a concept in the contracts.
Greg is a deep philosophical thinker. He would have loved that.
Absolutely.
If you're a true competitor, you never shy away from competition. I don't disagree with that. I think that's 100% right.
Yeah, that's where we'll disagree, because if you are, then you wouldn't, any conference wouldn't need to have 4 automatic qualifiers. You just earn it in.
But you're getting automatic qualifiers anyway. It boosts the media deal.
We'll see what happens.
I see again. This is a disagreement Rock and I have. I believe the 4 AQs is more about satisfying the TV partners than actually getting teams in.
Right. And I believe that if you have a year where the Big 12 or the ACC has 3 clear-cut teams and the math doesn't screw things, doesn't allow them to get in, and one of them is like a top 10 team and doesn't get in because of the AQ zone, that people's like trust in the playoff will get completely imploded in a not positive way.
I don't disagree with you, but how long does the ACC really have?
Big 12, Boise State and UNLV. Like I can still spin it. Like if you're gonna earn it, you earn it, right? I get there's interest in the whole playing concept. I get it, but I still think it's kind of crap. The playing concept. I think you could do the playing concept a lot more interesting. Like they're about to do it. I don't know, on the NCAA basketball tournament on Tuesday and Wednesday.
Okay. Just agree to disagree.
We do.
BYU football. This is our friend Shonsky. The only way a Super League concept works is to have all the Power Four involved. Other than that, it will fail. Again, I am not a Super League guy. I don't believe in it. I think we go to 3 power leagues. You have a 24-team Big 10, 20-team SEC, probably a 20-team Big 12, and a backfilled ACC that's going to they might be able to retain autonomous status, but they're really not going to be that big of a player once those big brands leave that conference.
Yeah, I think I'm not a Super League person. I'm not a Supra League person. Sorry, Bomber. I'm not a Sumo League person. Any of those. variations. I just don't really. I don't want it to happen. That doesn't mean I don't think it necessarily will happen. And I think what we have to just come to the realization is the ACC and the AAC will just become the ABC, right? They'll lose. One will step up half letter, the other one's going to drop down half letter. We'll just call them the ABC conference, completely made because ESPN and ABC screwed them over.
That is perfect. ABC conference. I got a super chat from our friend Rec Talk. Moen, when can we get you down to Atlanta where the players play? Probably next year in the playoff if Ohio State makes it to Georgia. I think there's a playoff game in Georgia next year, right?
Well, the championship, the Peach Bowl will be in, like, it's always in there, right? So there is a game there. The finals are in Miami.
I think this year's national championship game was in the Mercedes-Benz Dome.
Correct, but the Peach Bowl is still one of the 6 games in the rotations. So it's either it will either be the quarterfinals or the semifinals.
Yep. Well, if I can save my ass and make some money this year, Rec Talk, I will try and be down there to watch an Ohio State football game.
I mean, honestly, Moen, you should do that, but you probably should just go down and be in Rec's presence when he's like completely trolling Georgia fans at a Georgia game, wherever that's going to be, because the vitriol would just be worth the popcorn.
I'll tell you what, Rec Talk, if I'm down there, you're driving. Ain't no way. People down there, ain't no way I'm driving through Atlanta. But thank you for the super chat, sir. I will go ahead and give you a little Georgia Tech action here. There's a little Georgia Tech logo.
Like all the jolly fellows that drink my whiskey clear, I'm a red wreck from Georgia Tech and a hell of an engineer.
Hey. Wee bit of the brown stuff. Thank you again, Rec Talk, for that. And if I do make it to Georgia, you will be one of the first people I look up. Finn wants me to get to Indianapolis first, though. So, movie time blues. Who would have thought Indiana would make it in football, but miss it in basketball in one season? I know it's crazy. Movie time blues. There's a lot of weird stuff going on.
Yeah, I mean, look, UNC's so in on football, they intentionally didn't make the NCAA tournament, so everybody knows that they're serious.
UNC grad says no Super League, please. I think because he knows that he is guaranteed a spot in either the SEC or the Big Ten.
Right.
The people who want Super League are the people who are not going to be in the Big Ten and the SEC. And I had a soliloquy on Friday. Go back, watch this past week's Big Freaking Friday show. I agree it's not fair, but that's it. It is what it is. Speaking of Almighty Finn, he's tired of Michigan State. I want Illinois to win basketball championship. Almighty, I'll be honest with you. I want any Big Ten team to win a college basketball championship.
It would be pretty awesome this year if the Big Ten somehow did that in a year of how, Greg Sankey's intramural team also making the tournament.
I will say this. The last time the Big Ten won a basketball championship, I was in college. And I think I did see that Michigan State team that year. I'm thinking of expanding my dating preferences, opinions on girls from Boston. No, Rec Talk. Listen, if they're true Boston, born and raised in Boston, no. You won't like the noises they make in the bedroom. Trust me, it's not good.
Dude, you live in Atlanta.
been there and done that. That's wicked good. Oh yeah. It's the same thing with Youpers. Youpers are the same way. I can't stop laughing. Great BYU pulled a 6th seed. Yes, they did. I'm sure.
For some reason, I thought they were higher in the.
Well, they lost to Houston in the semifinals of the Big 12 Conference Championship. So I think that probably knocked them down a little bit. Joe Applewhite, good to see you, sir. If you're new here, consider becoming a subscriber to the College Football Mafia. We offer all kinds of great shows, great videos, keep you informed, keep you entertained. And then after you've done all that, head over to CFB Express. The link is there in the chat. In fact, I will pin that to the top. Pin message. So everybody can go over there to subscribe to Rock and Rant and Flo's new channel as well. Oh, Bob Swanger is here, and he says, "Hey, everyone. Good to see you, Bob."
What's going on, Bob?
Morris Simmons says, FSU also bring money. No denying that. Absolutely no denying that. A very valuable brand. Two Master says, bend the knee. That's correct. But I think when it's all said and done, the Big Ten will probably bend the knee to Notre Dame.
Well, they'll have a free training course from Jim Phillips.
They will. FSU is not a bad neighbor. We just had the guts to do what UNC wouldn't do, even though this was the UNC plan to break up the ACC.
I don't even know if it was the guts. I mean, not just, I don't mean FSU didn't have the guts. I think more of UNC is a frantic mess in their system to be able to do anything because one hand doesn't know what the other is doing. So I don't even know if it's a lack of courage. It's a lack of competence, possibly.
Yes, they would very much be the officer class of the British Empire, where, we'll stand behind and let you guys go forward and take care of all that stuff. Movie Time Blue says, how about Georgia Tech, Miami, Duke, and Stanford, and then hold to see how the private school in Indiana reacts? Problem is, I think you either go to 20 or you go to 24. I'm with Rock. I don't think you can just stop at 22.
Yeah, I don't see it happening in that form, not the possibly going to 24. I think the math does work, actually. People keep looking at rankings and values of teams in current deals as opposed to like what the multiplier of X amount of Big Ten games times those schools would be. And as Moen talks about all the time, the value of a brand like Stanford and even Cal for the academic alliance has different value than just whether they got a half share or not if they're coming in as willing partners and not crybabies. No, those bridges, Moen will probably be the one to be able to talk about more in terms of a couple of years ago and how long, like, do you have to wait 100 years to forgive Cal for attitudes of the past? Is it 50 years for Stanford from the Big Ten Academic Alliance, if that's actually going to be one of many factors in expansion conversations?
Yeah, we're not bending the knee for Stanford. Bo Weevil says UNC wants out. They just don't want to be the one that breaks up Tobacco Road. Yes, this is very much like they don't want to be responsible for breaking up with a person, so they're trying to get everybody else to break up for them.
Yeah, in the meantime, they're like sleeping around virtually.
Kansas is a 7th seed. Looks weird. Yeah, and keep in mind they're building a brand new stadium also. And they're decent in football. I mean, they didn't really catch on till late in the year this year, but yeah, that Kansas is now a football school apparently. All good 720. All right. WVU got screwed. Caleb Ramirez says, we won't be in the NIT. We'll be in the basketball crown that Fox created to compete with the NIT. I'm just going to tell you guys right now, I don't watch college basketball. I really don't. I watch hockey, I watch wrestling, I watch football. And to show you how much I don't know about college basketball, last year we did an ESPN bracket challenge. I won. Now you think about that.
He liked the colors of the teams. That's how we did it.
I don't even remember how I did it. I think I just clicked and I ended up winning. So, Liner Ted says, hey, all 14 of 16 teams is crazy. This is how they want the CFP. I'm sure they would like that. Unfortunately, they don't have the quality of teams to get 16 into the CFP. Shonsky says, I'm actually worried about the Utes beating us this year. Utah is going to surprise a lot of people this year, in my opinion. I don't know how their schedule shakes out. Let me know if it's a weak schedule. I think if they've got a weak schedule in the front end, they can get going. But
Well, Utah definitely surprised a lot of people this past season. I'm one of them. I had them in winning the Big 12. So
Daniel Gagak says, to be honest, if you asked me at the beginning of the year, I thought a 500 season would be the high point.
hey, Daniel, take it what you can get. I'm old enough to remember being in the Final Four, and this time barely winning 4 games 2 years later, and having a coaching change for Miami. So it's all relative.
Shonsky says, I live in Kentucky now, but come to Utah all the time. I didn't know that, Shonsky. Next time I'm in Kentucky, drinks are on you. Morris Simmons, if the Big decides not to invite Florida State, Notre Dame, Clemson, they will fall further behind the SEC for as head-to-head matchups. Well, I don't think the Big Ten's not going to invite Notre Dame. I don't think you need to worry about that. Florida State and Clemson are the sticky wickets in that equation. And again, I've brought it up on Friday, but I'll reiterate. I think Miami is just more of a big type. AAU school has a hospital attached to it, a hospital system attached to it. They like that. Big DMA market. It's number 7, I believe, in the country. So I get that their fans don't sell out the stadium. I get that they rent a stadium or they share a stadium with the NFL franchise there. I get that there's a lot of pro sports there in Miami, but they're just, and that private thing, that's going to be a turn on to a lot of people in the Big Ten, not to have to deal with state politics on anything. They've still got a bad taste in their mouth from the Cal UCLA split. So. UNC grad says Georgia Tech to the Big.
I'd like to see that. I think it makes a lot of sense.
I'm not opposed to the idea. I like Georgia Tech to the Big, but again, I mentioned it on Friday and everybody lost their mind. Duke is a dark horse candidate to the Big Ten.
Well, if they so over-index in basketball, I mean, to me, that would be the definite proof, right? That the Big Ten does actually care about more than just like your media brand value, right? Because you'll get the basketball over-indexing. What are they, the number 2 or 3 basketball brand percentage-wise behind UNC? The worst top 4, I don't remember it off the top of my head. But they certainly bring in a hell of a lot of money on the research side of the equation and the prestige factor of the academics. So, the presidents have a vote and they can dictate some degree, then I can totally understand them wanting that. It doesn't make less sense. I'm sure Northwestern would love Duke there. Some additional private schools in the mix, so it's not all these big state land grants around them.
Don't disagree with you at all. Stormy Cyclone from Iowa State. What is your guys' timeline on ACC action? After health settlement for sure. It's a great question.
Yeah, I think it's still a couple of years away. Personally, I think if nothing happens by August 15th, we're like 2 or 3 years away. I can see a rationale for things going super fast because you can then have the big conferences that are taking schools away, actually get more schools into the college football playoff sooner, maybe even go to 5 AQs. But I think if it doesn't happen soon, then there's like this 2 or 3 year entry wait. I think, maybe people get in like 2029 versus 2030, 21, which means you start hearing about things in late 26, 27. That's my guess. I'm also one who, I don't think the House settlement's getting settled on April 7th. I just don't. I don't have any. I would take Moen's newfound secret stash of Crown that he's gotten pre-embargo, pre-tariff, and I would bet it, knowing that he would cry if he lost it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stormy Cyclone, for that super chat, sir. I'm going to let you cook.
Let him cook. Let him cook now. Let him cook. I said let him cook.
Thank you, Stormy Cyclone. I hope it's a little nicer for you in Iowa than it is here. It's been cold and dreary all day. Let me go back to live chat. There was one a little further down here that I'm going to use to take us right into our discussion for the evening, our main discussion. Joseph Kurlagan Jr., I love the College Football Mafia show, and I'm a Notre Dame fan. I want Notre Dame to join a conference. And if people say no, to quote Conan the Barbarian, to hell with you. Let's just say this right now. Conan the Barbarian, fantastic movie. The original with Arnold Schwarzenegger, directed by John Milius. Oh, one of my favorite movies.
Joseph, it would be great if you just chime in as to, since so many Notre Dame fans are opposed to it, why you actually want them to join a conference.
Have your enemies driven before you and hear the lamentations of the women and children.
Yeah, my only good, besides Terminator ones, is just like Atuma, which is the wrong movie.
Man, I'm telling you what, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he tore it up in the 80s. Terminator, Predator, Running Man, Total Recall.
Running Man was great. It's like one of my favorite good movies.
You know they're remaking it too. I hate that. Absolutely.
There's a 10% chance that it's good. It can happen. Sometimes remakes are good, but like Total Recall remake was not good.
All right. Well, we're going to jump into the topic of the evening. 30 minutes into the evening, got a little carried away on comments there. Yeah, Jose, True Lies, another great one. That was a little in the 90s, but I think Total Recall was 92. So, Notre Dame, what's it going to take? Who's going to push it over the edge? Who in the ACC? What domino falls first, Brock?
I still have. If it doesn't happen, if it happens this summer, I think it's probably North Carolina, right? If not, I'm going to go out with an outlier that it's actually not one of the 3 or 4. It's another school in another year or two that wants to make sure they secure a home in the Big 12. And it's somebody in that 5 to 8 zone of the ACC, whether that's Louisville, that, subsequent to Brett Yormark closing a capital deal, and they want to, some schools worried about being left out. I actually think it could go down differently than we think, just because we're also predisposed to assuming it's going to be Florida State or North Carolina. I don't think it's Clemson first, right? So I would say my best guess is it's North Carolina, because that just unwinds everything. Florida State, because they're so pissed. But my third choice would actually be probably somebody looking to go to the Big 12, but that would not be this summer. That would be like somebody worried about being left out a couple years down the road.
I will make a bold proclamation. I believe the first one out will be Miami. And I will explain why. It's not going to be this summer. Might not be the summer after that, but probably the summer after that. And the reason why is North Carolina is going to declare they're leaving, and they're going to get tied up with that Wolfpack backpack. That's going to have to be settled. And once North Carolina declares they're leaving, I think Miami declares they're leaving, and Miami's out right away.
Well, I'll tell you the reason why I'm not skeptical, but I'm hesitant to buy onto that Kool-Aid that I would love to get in drink instead of the iced tea I have with something else, is this guy Moen has told me constantly, at least over the last 4 or 5, maybe the last 5 or 6 months after different zones before, that Big 10 might only go to 20, and it's Notre Dame, and if it's Notre Dame, their travel partner would be Stanford. So there's my hesitance on that theory, unless my theory holds true that I don't think Notre Dame's going to be the linchpin, even though the Big 10 would want them to be first, that they are holding out at the end because they know they could be even the 25th team if necessary. In which case, if the Big 10 wants to expand and get those markets, get the foothold into Florida, then I can ride or die with what you just said.
Okay, and now I will explain my logic on why my opinion changed. Notre Dame worked out a deal with the ACC that gives them Miami, Florida State, and Clemson on a regular schedule. I think the Big 10 would make a generous offer to Miami to leave and disrupt that. And I think Notre Dame seeing North Carolina, Miami, because I think Clemson and Florida State would leave in short order after Miami. I think everybody's going to wait and see how North Carolina kind of figures its way. I do think you're right. I think North Carolina will declare first. I think they'll declare first. They may even pay all the money first. They're going to have to figure that stuff out with the North Carolina State Wolfpack. And the hard thing to do with bureaucracy is get through red tape. They could be a while. It could be 2 years tied up in the North Carolina Board of Governors, state legislator, sitting governor, et cetera, et cetera. Miami's a private school. They cut a check and they're gone.
Yeah, like look, I think the Miami has the people to do that, right? Like Miami's president was, ironically, the past CEO of Deloitte, of the theoretical clearinghouse, and though they're quiet in a way, the guys who brought FC, who work with Beckham and brought Messi to Miami, those are the guys who are two of the 5 or 6 billionaires behind Miami's dollars, who also have good relationships with some of the media networks because of their soccer profile. The check would get written really fast.
Yeah, and here's my other thing that I would say. I think Florida State and Clemson declare at that point. I don't think Florida State or Clemson will have any issues with their government. I also think at that point, Duke probably does leave the ACC. I could see the Big Ten jumping quick and adding Miami and Duke as the first 2 teams because they are private schools. They could get them into the conference almost immediately.
Where do you stand? And look, all this is opinion, and opinions change all the time. We get new information, reading tea leaves, right? There's no right or wrong answer. We'll all be right or wrong eventually. At least people on this channel own it when when things change and the opinions change, we back it up. But where's your current belief on the damaged relationships kind of zone, Florida State, Big Ten? Because we all think Florida State's going to be in the AAU sooner rather than later. And that could be as soon as Big Ten schools want to make sure that they're also in there should they have a strategic decision. But where do you think, now that the smoke is clearing, the lawsuits are settled, all that kind of stuff, the bad partner conversation, whether you believe it or not, that's out there, where do you think that stands right now? Whether it's just like your gut instinct from just being in and around the world, whispers in your ear, like where do you think it stands with Florida State? Less so Clemson, because they were less loud about it. It seemed to be the vitriol directed at Florida State, which I think is a little bit unfair.
Listen, there's a lot of people I don't like, but if they handed me $500, I'd like them a lot better. So, I mean, I'm not going to rule out Florida State, but again, I don't know. I think, listen, if you can get Miami and Duke and snap them up quick, get them into your conference quick, get them integrated at a half share, which I think Miami and Duke would both take a half share.
Yeah,
I don't
wouldn't
think
be too worried.
They wouldn't be too worried about it. They could get Big Ten network established in North Carolina and Florida as quickly as they could. Might be a chance to catch the SEC reeling a little bit if the SEC is waiting for North Carolina. I think that puts Notre Dame at the precipice. Miami is out. Duke is out. Now, Notre Dame loves to be with those schools and hobnob with those fancy schools like Duke and Stanford. So Duke's out. Miami's out. Florida State and Clemson have declared they're looking for a home. At that point, the Big Ten can start saying, well, maybe we do want to look at Florida State and Clemson. Maybe we're not that interested in Notre Dame at this point. Meanwhile, you've probably got Stanford out there on the West Coast panicking. They're already pissed off about all the travel they have to do for all their Olympic sports. Now, can you imagine them having to go be one of the 2 schools out there with a depleted ACC, flying all the way to play a polo game against Wake Forest? I mean, I can't see them doing that. And I think they're going to exert pressure on Notre Dame. So I think you're going to get all these pressure points happening. I think the Big Ten is going to pressure Notre Dame. I think they're going to do it by getting Miami and Duke quick and then using interest in Florida State, Clemson. I think Stanford's going to exert some pressure on them. And I think ultimately that's what brings Notre Dame to the table. Now, I could be wrong. Probably will be wrong. Just my opinion. I know other people have opinions. There's a famous saying, opinions are like buttholes. And Jim Phillips is golden green.
Do you think Paul Finebaum, who alternates between just being a troll and a jerk, and sometimes being a troll and a jerk because he's been given information or insight or some degree of marching orders from the SEC and Greg Sankey and his ESPN overlords? Do you think him trashing Florida State again last week was just him enjoying being able to troll? Or do you think that was him taking SEC talking points and trying to continue the softening of the ground so that, less about not wanting Florida State, but hopefully being able to get Florida State cheaper? If they even go that route and Florida State doesn't go to the Big Ten, which is what I actually personally want to happen, is to go to the Big Ten with them.
I think Paul Finebaum is just a douchebag. I listen, I know the idea that, they're feeding him the narrative of this. They're feeding him this narrative. I think Paul Finebaum just has a hard on for Florida State. And I think it goes back to when they were undefeated ACC conference champions and they got left out of the playoff in favor of an SEC Alabama. And it wasn't right. It wasn't right. And Paul Finebaum took it personally because Florida State fans called out ESPN, as they should have. Florida State should have been in that playoff. I don't care if they went through three quarterbacks and their backup quarterback was JP Lawson after a buffet. They deserve to be in that playoff. And you say, well, they would have just got blown out. Well, who cares? That wasn't the point.
There's not an asterisk caveat theorem of, well, if you get it blown out, we can ignore our longstanding practices.
So, and I think Paul Finebaum still has a hard on about that. And I think he just does this shit to needle Florida State fans. I mean, look, Kirk Herbstreit could have the biggest hemorrhoid from Florida State fans. You don't see him going out there and just needling them constantly. Paul Finebaum does. Paul Finebaum's a douchebag. Listen, I can't explain it anymore. Talking about buttholes, his is definitely crimson colored. You better believe that.
In terms of Notre Dame, do you, even though you think the pressure's going to come on for them to get to join first, do you also agree with my theory, and if you don't agree with the idea of it, that even if the Big Ten somehow went to 24 and Notre Dame then came later and realized they couldn't actually schedule people, that the minute they wanted to come in, they'd figure out how to do a 25-team league?
That's a great question. It depends on who the 24 you have in your conference are. I mean, let's say for the sake of argument, you do get Florida State and Clemson, and you take Miami and Duke or Georgia Tech. You take one of those two. Well, you have to take two more too to get to 24. So you would take Duke and you just to get a West.
You bring
Coast
Georgia
school,
Tech and Cal. Like you just make Stanford.
You just
happy
bring Cal. Yeah, you just bring Cal. You just say, because Cal, I mean, come on, Cal's going to do it for a hot dog and a couple breath mints. So Cal's going to come along. I mean, at that point, if I've got Clemson, Florida State, and Miami, Notre Dame, look forward to playing against G5 opponents. Go see if the Big 12 will cut you the same sweetheart deal that you cut with Jim Phillips, because I don't think Brett Yormark is going to get on his knees for you and just let you schedule the Big 12 teams you want to schedule. He's not going to let you schedule Colorado and Arizona State and Texas Tech and let you cherry pick that schedule. I don't think that's going to happen. So I don't know. If they get to 24 and they think they've got a solid enough 24-team league, I think they might not take Notre Dame at that point. They might say, hey, look, we got big enough brands. We don't necessarily need a Notre Dame.
Fair
It'd
enough.
be nice to have, but we don't need it. But I could be wrong. The Big Ten could add them at 25. Almighty Finn says Bubba hated on FSU. Bubba Cunningham. That's another one. That's another guy. The easiest way to tell Bubba Cunningham's lying is his mouth is moving. Let me scroll through here. A2 is right off the bat saying don't need Cal. And then he says Notre Dame likes to play those West Coast schools, so let them play UCLA, USC, Stanford, Washington, Oregon. Hey, look, I don't know that Notre Dame USC is going to remain on the schedule after this season. That if the Big Ten and SEC sign a scheduling agreement, if I'm USC, I'm taking them off the schedule. That's why would you would basically set yourself up as having the hardest schedule in college football if you did that. You'd have to play in the Big Ten, which is one of the hardest conferences. You'd have to play against an SEC opponent, and it's probably going to be a pretty damn good SEC opponent. USC is a brand. They're probably going to schedule it against Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma, LSU. You're going to be scheduled Florida. You're going to be scheduled against some good SEC brands. Now you want to take Notre Dame, who gets to set a cupcake schedule for most of their schedule, and add them to your schedule. You're basically, you could be setting yourself up for another loss, and that could knock you out of a conference playing game or the playoffs altogether.
But it wouldn't really impact the playing games, right? If you still go good and win the conference, it's irrelevant.
It could depend on tiebreakers, though. What if tiebreakers, they look at out of conference record?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you could get down there 5th or 6th, but then the flip side is you could actually have a better loss on strength of schedule to somebody else on a tiebreaker, depending upon how far down you got to go.
Illini Ted says UNC with the ACC is like the Big with Oregon and Washington, waiting on the Big 12 to deliver the death blow so they could move. Again, I think part of it is those private schools, man. Cut a check and bounce. But I could be wrong. Wouldn't be the first time, won't be the last time. A2 says Clemson is working hard to get that AAU. Was reading their website. They hope to get it by 2035. Yeah, and remember, AAU isn't a prerequisite. It's just one of the key points that the Big Ten likes in their schools. But most importantly, what they really, really like is AAU with an attached medical system. They love those hospital systems. They really do.
Yeah. And the other part, too, is, we don't know this for sure, but very likely all of the juggling that's going to go down and the conference stuff is likely to happen well in advance of 2035. So it's fairer to just assume that Clemson's going to be judged on other merits plus their aspirations. And I just can't see that the AAU factor is going to completely decide what the fate for Clemson is. They're going to head into this year as probably a preseason top 3 or 4 team. Dabo's woken up. So, they're establishing themselves right where they've been for the better part of the last decade. So,
yeah, and I think that's an important point too. I think Clemson and Florida State, the best way to help their stock is to keep winning, make deep playoff runs. Illini Ted says Miami is also a destination for big alumni, which seems goofy, but it is also part of the equation. What's the famous saying about Miami, Rock and Rant?
I'm not even sure which one you're going to do because I live there. So
Miami is more northern than it is Florida.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is a great retirement zone, but yes, like it's closer to New York than it is to Tallahassee.
Yeah. I didn't know what I was going to say. Miami, the cocaine is fantastic.
I wasn't sure, like, if you're going to say where old people go to die, because that's still true. Like, who knows?
Vox Quindaro brings up a great point. Kansas, AAU, R1 Research Institute, National Teaching Medical School, hospital system, and NCI Comprehensive Oncology, plus the Kansas Jayhawk brand. Listen, I talk about types. I'm going to do a video on it. What's the Big Ten's types? And we're going to rate them. Who hits all the points for the Big Ten? That right there is pretty much it. AAU, R1, National Teaching Medical School, hospital, the oncology part's nice. And the reason, guys, that they like these schools with medical schools and attached hospital systems, federal grants are getting cut left and right. Those brands, the nice thing about those schools, they can get private pharmaceutical grants, and a lot of them do. So those are grants that won't be cut because the pharmaceutical companies will continue to pay them to do double-blind studies. So,
right, that's definitely a thing. And doesn't that make, if I'm not mistaken, because if you look at things of like AAU level, you have Arizona State, but I don't think they have a hospital system attached to it.
I'm not sure on Arizona State.
I think Utah does. So
here's the thing. I know a lot of people bring up Arizona State. Our friend Immaculate brings up Arizona State a lot. The problem with Arizona State, again, it's a messy thing. They've got the University of Arizona attached to them. They share the same board of governors. Is that board of governors going to let Arizona State go to the Big Ten and leave University of Arizona in the Big 12? That UCLA Cal thing, that left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. So,
and Utah has its hospital system, so there's another one you
Colorado
could consider.
does as well. Colorado at Boulder does as well. So that's another school out west that we could add to the Utah, Colorado, Cal. I think would be the three most likely after Stanford. And then you've got the Texas schools. Look, Texas Tech is making lots of investment. TCU is making lots of investment. Does the Big Ten want to put a team in Texas? If they want to put a team in Texas, you're going to have to look into Texas schools as well. I don't think anybody's got it right on what ends up happening at the end of college football realignment.
Definitely not.
I don't think anybody has it right now. So I'm not going to say
genetics has it right because
yes, genetics 56.
Sorry, I forgot.
He's omnipotent and has special powers and all this stuff.
Yeah,
and
he
really
plagiarizes with the best of them, man.
Yeah, and he's really good friends with a guy at Nebraska. Morris Simmons, I see there are going to be a lot of surprises on where these schools are going to for conference. And I don't disagree with you, Morris. I think, listen, we'll both be surprised. That's, at one point I had $250,000 in medical debt, and they called me and they said, when can we expect payment? I said, expect it whenever you want. We'll both be surprised. Brett Taylor, Super League coming. Just like FBS, FCS split, the top teams will split so they don't share revenue with 134 schools. Probably 48-64 will split. Again, I think you just end up with a power of three. I don't think you see the Big Ten or the SEC giving up their autonomy, giving up their value to help brands that don't have as much value to media partners as they do. So
that's another reason why I don't really know if I believe Congress is going to do anything, right? Because there are a bunch of states that have senators that don't have schools in the power two right now. And even some of those senators have mixed allegiance within their own state, right? Where they might have a school that's there or a possible realignment center. If you want to keep leverage to make sure your schools in your state are still within any of these playoff scenarios, the last thing you want to do is give the NCAA or the Power Four, as it were now, everything they want, because unless you can make a contingency that they can't, split off into the P3 or Super League or whatever version and keep all those guys out of a playoff, the minute they get any sort of, limited antitrust thing, they're free to do whatever they want. So I just don't see 60 getting into something comprehensive. I think they'll maybe do something around the margins, but we'll see. I have not gone broke doubting Congress's ability to get things done on unimportant issues relative to the most average person's needs in this country. So,
yeah. Crom, I never pray to you before. I have no tongue for it. I have no tongue for it. I have no tongue for it. But you appreciate battle. So grant me my revenge. I love that movie. Predator, yes, the original Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I mean, we could do. I wish we could stream movies, guys. We'd do an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie-thon in here, man. 1980s, 1990s, Arnold Schwarzenegger, the best. The best. And he wasn't the best actor in the world. I'll say it, but God, he was a movie star. Remember when we had movie stars?
You can do it, man. All you do is you tell everyone what movie it's going to be X amount of time. They watch it in their home. You start the time code, and you just talk about it in live time. The Star Wars guys do that kind of stuff all the time on YouTube channels.
Well,
or you can go into Discord and totally hijack everything.
That's true. We could do it with our Discord. Steel Austin talking to D5 Terp says, I don't think FSU ends up in the big. They're an SEC school, and the SEC has pro rata to immediately bring in 4 schools prior to meteorites coming up, which gives them the advantage. Morris Simmons says Miami will not jump over Florida State to the big.
Hold on a second. I need a screenshot. Don't go.
John Dry says your mark is more genius than the other commissioners. Listen, I think your mark is certainly heads and tails above Jim Phillips. I mentioned on Twitter a few weeks back, George Kliavkoff was inexperienced and inept. Jim Phillips is experienced and negligent. I think he's far worse. They gave him a huge contract extension to keep him, and he basically made it that every school that's not named Florida State, Miami, and Clemson makes way less over the next 5 years and then gets blown up.
Hey, he finally did something good.
I know Miami, Florida State, and Clemson fans like that. I don't think Wake Forest, Boston College, or Syracuse fans are big fans of it. Brett Taylor, it would serve ACC right if Virginia Tech, Pitt, Miami, and Georgia Tech left and joined the Big 12. That brings another great question, though. How long would some of these teams stay around to get some of that buyout money?
You know, I think, that's a good question. I mean, it depends upon how. I don't think it's clear to us when that money comes into the ACC conference, how immediately it gets paid out. You would think, and I say this with like every caveat known to man, that the ACC, as it were, including Jim Phillips, would have learned their lesson and wouldn't take all of that money in from exit fees, whether that's 165 million times 2 or 75 million times 4, and dole it out right away. I think that's the unknown that would indicate whether someone would be like Louisville. I think we could all guess in our world of being obsessed with this topic that there's no world where they wouldn't get a spot in the Big 12 at a minimum. I don't think anybody believes that, barring something that, would shock us all. So for them, if they knew they can get some of that cash and then leave a year later, maybe they would do that. But like, let's say if everybody thinks the chalk is that the Big 12 can expand by 4, and the line between teams 3, 4, and 5, and maybe 6 is pretty much like Coke or Pepsi to most people. Who's going to risk getting that money and wind up being the last person out if there's a contingency on how long you need to stay?
I think ultimately with the Big 12, we have to figure out if this private capital deal is going to go through. Because when that ACC settlement got agreed to, I'm sure there are teams that have no desire to sign on long-term with the Big 12.
Right.
Kansas, Texas Tech, Colorado, Arizona State, Utah. These schools if they think they have a shot at making it to the Big 2, they're not going to sign a long-term extension that's going to keep them locked in the Big 12 and make them unavailable to pick up. So I know we heard that it was a few weeks away. That was a few weeks ago, a couple weeks ago. Interesting to see when that happens, if that happens. The other thing that's interesting is we don't know if it is Redbird Capital, but we know one of the private equity companies wanted Connecticut added to the Big 12. If you're the Big 12 right now, you're not rushing to add Connecticut. I'm sorry. If you want a New York market, you can get Syracuse, and we can say all we want about how great UConn basketball is. UConn football is, they need a new stadium bad. They needed like a new stadium like 20 years ago.
Yeah, for sure.
Syracuse has a Carrier Dome up there still. Better football brand history with Syracuse. You still get New York market. If they can get their basketball program figured back out, they usually have a pretty good basketball brand. So, if I'm in the Big 12, I'm not rushing to grab UConn. I'm not.
No, the only three are, like, if you assume that North Carolina is not available to you and Notre Dame is not available to you, the only three you'd like rush out to get right now are three schools that probably, if you brought them in, your TV partners would consider giving you a plus share of what you normally would have. Like if you brought Florida State, I'm not saying Florida State's going to the Big 12, but in a theoretical multiverse where they somehow that played, Fox and those guys would probably give more because they're worth more than the average revenue deal for any of the schools in there outside of Colorado right now. And when Florida State's back at their peak, they're at Colorado audience and higher generally, right? So there's a few teams like that could be temporary partners that are not, but then you have to figure out what is the incentive for Florida State, right? Because at least for a few more years, you're still making more money in the, actually several more years. Right now, Florida State's making a lot more money going forward with the new rev share model, right? It's than the average. It was a few $1,000,000 apart, ACC to Big 12 until 3 weeks ago, right? ACC had more, but it was, not $30 million more, but Florida State's in a position to possibly be making 25 to 35, $40 million more a year in the ACC if they can both draw on the ratings like they normally do and get back to their level. Plus, if they actually, get to premier bowl games and or the playoff, there's a pretty big gap. So Brett, your marketing team would have to have some other funding sources to make it attractive to a Florida State or a Clemson to do that kind of move, even if it was only for a few years.
Yep, we've got about 10 to 15 more minutes left on the show here, guys. I would remind you, you're watching Moan After Dark on the College Football Mafia Network. We'll try to get to as many comments. I mean, we've been killing it in comments tonight, guys. I know we've been lacking in previous weeks. I tried to make sure today as many comments as we could get to. Always have preferential for members of the Mafia family. Super chats all get read. If you want to put something out there that just absolutely has to be read right now, it'll have to be a super chat. I want to again remind you that Rock has started a new channel with our friend Miami Flow. Go ahead and head on over there. I have pinned that link in the top of the chat window. You can see it there. And if you're watching us for the first time, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe to us. Give us a like, leave us a comment. Those things are all free and help us so much. They help us tremendously here at the College Football Mafia Network. Help us spread the word and get the word out there. So, but you just brought up a great point, Rock, and I want to say this before I forget it. This is why I think Miami might be the first one out. I think if North Carolina announces, let's say they announce in 2027, they can't really they've got to figure out that Wolfpack backpack. They got to figure that out.
I mean, they could just start right now by selling Wolfpack backpacks like you wanted to do. You got 2 years to crowdsource the buyout.
Cut them in on revenue shares. I can license North Carolina backpacks. But they're going to have some kind of hold up there. I don't think that's been decided yet. If Miami and Clemson see that, Miami and Clemson may not be eager to jump right away too. They may say, well, our best bet is the SEC, and the SEC is not going to do anything until North Carolina is resolved. So let's stay here, make the unequal revenue share, and then we can just get out as soon as North Carolina clears, or it looks like it's going to clear. And in that case, that's when I think Miami could just sneak right out the door, go right out from under them.
Yeah, look, the private schools have the most frictionless thing. I would be stunned if there was ever a world where Miami and the SEC aligned. I just can't imagine that happening, which means it probably will happen because I'd be shocked by it. But yeah, I can see that happening ultimately.
Jose says Miami, Georgia Tech, and stop at 20. And Jose is a USC fan. He does not want Notre Dame in the conference. Does not. John Dry says Notre Dame to the Pac. LOL.
Look, there's a multiverse where that happens for sure.
Moen says, look out. There's a hurricane coming through. Fantastic reference, MBM. I got it. The choke slam. Jose, unless Notre Dame becomes 21 plus.
Shot chaser, man.
Possible Wisconsin versus BYU matchup in the second round. Will it happen? Will we have Badgers versus Cougars? And you know what? I've got a Badger sound effect versus a Cougar sound effect. I'd put my money on the Cougar in a real life matchup, but we learned something important. You don't ever mess with Badgers or Wolverines. They will tear your ass up.
Look, I would like that game just to sit there and watch Bomber and Ryan try to be civil. Because Bomber's very civil and wants to have everybody just get along, except for when BYU is involved, and then it gets a little bit more vitriolic on, at least on Twitter, if not in chat.
If you really want to upset Nate, Ryan, just go in there and tell him that Utah could be a Big Ten team. Joseph Kurlagon Jr., the Big Ten can get Stanford, Cal, Miami, Florida State, and after 2030 to not schedule Notre Dame for any reason. There you go. You have to bring pressure to bear. John Dry says, I know Louisville would be fourth to leave, but probably with Virginia Tech and North Carolina State. Maybe Duke. I just can't see Duke in the Big 12.
I can't either. If it came down to it, if they didn't have a football program, I'd see Duke going to the Big East before I'd see them going to the Big 12. But football is obviously a big deal. I just have a hard time imagining Big 12 Duke's alums being okay with the association, as wrong as I think that view would be.
We can come out and say it, Duke are snobs. And they have every right to be. If you've got a degree from Duke, you have every right to be a snob. I couldn't get a degree from Duke. I couldn't even get into Northwestern. So, All Good 720 says Duke, Michigan State, UCLA, Indiana would give you some legacy basketball teams. And Duke's been pretty decent in football the last 4 to 5 years. That's a great point. They've invested in Manny Diaz. I think they're putting money into that program. They brought in Malik Murphy that 1 year. So apparently they've got some NIL money. Very well.
Yeah, I mean, they brought their rumored number for the Tulane quarterback transfers in the 3 million zone.
There you go. Good day to be a transfer quarterback. Ryan Willis says, I can't wait. All right, Ryan. Don't forget, though, before that happens, or I guess it would be after that happens, you got to get past the Lady Buckeyes and the Frozen Four. You remember that. Back to back, baby. Thank you for the super chat, Ryan. You don't like milk sounders. I know that. So I'll just give you a little oh. Hopefully Greg will be saying that when you play the Minnesota Golden Gophers on the ice, so you can get that matchup with Ohio State championship game. MBM says Duke degree costs money unless you've got a scholarship. Yeah. Duke is like a sister school to Northwestern. Very true. Northwestern and Duke would be relatively similar in terms of academic and. Okay,
all of these schools right now are bonkers. They're all bonkers cost-wise right now if you're not getting scholarships and aren't independently wealthy. I want to say like the all-in cost of Miami with residents and stuff like that is like approaching $100,000, which is just insanely stupid.
Oh, definitely. BYU football, they are a Big Ten team. Now, see, he called Utah a Big Ten team. Ooh. Don't tell Nate that. Engine number 9. Florida, Georgia, and Alabama do not want Florida State and Clemson to join the SEC. I don't disagree with you, but like I said, somebody hands me $500, my opinion of them elevates greatly.
Yeah. How old are you, Mon? I'm old enough to remember where Texas A&M was promised that Texas would not join the SEC.
That's true. Absolutely true. Yeah, can't deny that. I was old enough to remember when Ohio State was promised they would control realignment if they let Oregon in.
I like that. No, I like that because I knew what that meant.
Remove. We got some people spamming in the chat here. I think they're probably from somewhere in Asheville, North Carolina. So I apologize for that, people. There's kids in Asheville, they just don't know when to quit. BYU football, Shonsky says, what does money have to do with anything when Northwestern and Purdue are recruiting in the high 70s, dead last in all Power 4? Kick that dead weight the fuck out of here. Hey, sometimes it's about who you know. They're in a very wealthy family.
Yeah, I think that's the proof positive that Big Ten academic alliance matters, right?
Absolutely. Not a coincidence that Notre Dame, Miami jumped over more deserving schools for AAU membership. This is a great point that D5 Terps is making. AAU membership, that is obtained by receiving, I believe, 75% of votes from current AAU members. So the Big Ten has 17 out of 18 votes. So they probably had to vote for Notre Dame and Miami. Was there a quid pro quo on that? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure they did, though. You know, it's hard to. I'd like to know who you consider to be the deserving schools that were jumped over by. You know, because I know Miami's stats pretty cold in terms of rankings and research and the medical stuff and other programs. That the other part too is just the international draw that Miami has, like student wise. It was like that when I was in college, let alone now. In terms of as Greg talks about it, the enrollment apocalypse. But I'm curious, D5 Terps, who you think got passed over at that time that was completely unfair? I'm not saying you're wrong. I don't know who you're referring to.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. But he may be right. There may be schools with better research numbers. Case in point, Oregon has terrible research numbers, and they're in the AAU. Sometimes
right,
it's
and they've
not
been in
about,
there for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. Vox Quindaro says, I'm at a dinner and being bored to tears. I'm sorry, Vox Quindaro. At least you can put it in an earpiece. Put it in an earpiece or something. Texas Tech plays North Carolina W Thursday. North Carolina women? It can't be North Carolina. They're not in. Oregon and AAU since approximately 1968. Very true. And their academics aren't great, but if you actually look at what the AAU stands for, could just be amount of quality teaching positions you have. There's a lot of different things that go into AAU, but research has become much more important.
Yeah, it's like realignment. Everyone thinks it's just one thing, but there are several factors that weigh into all of it, and depending upon who's voting or who's looking to expand, their levers are all slightly differently set up.
Absolutely.
Like Mountain West, right? At Pac-12 right now might be like, do you have a pulse and a program? And you're west of the Mississippi River.
I'm going to try and get to some more of these. 17 of the 18 Big Ten schools are AAU accredited, except for Nebraska. who recently lost their AAU status. Yes, they were actually kicked out of the AAU. Stormy Cyclone can tell you too, Iowa State voluntarily left the AAU because in recent years, the AAU has put a lot more emphasis on medical research. Nebraska's problem is their university is in Lincoln. They do have an attached medical school, but it's not on campus in Lincoln. It's actually in Omaha. So they are not allowed to claim that for research. And that's what hurt Nebraska's case. And Texas had a lot to do with getting Nebraska kicked out of the AAU.
It is interesting definitions of geography that way. Like technically, Miami's medical school is not on campus, on Coral Gables campus, like 4 or 5 miles or 6 or 7 miles away in downtown Miami, because that's where the hospital, they basically.
Yeah. But I mean, still, it's in Miami.
Yeah, for sure. It's in the same vicinity, and they now have more hospitals that Miami owns and a lot more of U-Health centers all over the place. So the hospital systems is fairly insane.
Yeah, and when I was doing research for this video I'm doing, they're building a huge new tower down there in Miami for like medical center.
Yep.
So I want to do this one first. Vox Quindaro, Kansas has been AAU since 1909. Yes, I have. 116 years in the AAU, posers. Did Kansas get their back scratched for voting for Notre Dame in Miami? Jose says, hold that AAU ransom. John Dry clarified, UNC Wilmington. All right. This will be our last one here. UC Riverside and Irvine just got into the AAU, and that was done by the University of California voting block. Yeah. The University of California operates differently than a lot of colleges do. They are a system of schools. Technically, every school in the Cal system is the land grant school of the state of California. As ridiculous as it is, UCLA is a land grant school. Cal's a land grant school. UC Davis is a land grant school. UC Riverside is a land grant school. And that was part of the reason that everybody got all pressed and bent out of shape when UCLA and USC decided to pack their shit and head on over to the East Coast.
And even with that, it seems still way less discombobulated than the UNC system right now with Chapel Hill. Right, there was a lot of noise about it, but it was kind of minimal pushback. The system in California, there's actually 2 systems technically. There's the Cal State system and the University of California system. That I think ultimately also
Absolutely.
eventually,
All right,
that's
going to wrap it up for us. Let me get this comment off here real quick, and we're going to do our last call. Oh, let me get this one from Antoine Johnson. If I click on the right one. Antoine Johnson, member for 14 months. Thank you, sir. ASU Medical School opens in 2028. Okay, do they have a learning hospital on campus or in the general vicinity, Antoine? That would be the more pressing thing. They like the hospital. The hospitals allow them to do research. That's basically what it boils down to. But thank you for letting us know that. I will look into it when I do Big Ten, when I do this video. Although now my expansion candidates have expanded to like 16. So thank you for being a member.
It's going to be a whole mini series on Netflix.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be several parts. Several parts. Thank you for being a member for 14 months, Antoine. We do appreciate it. Good luck to the Sun Devils next year in football. I think Kenny Dillingham's got him on a brilliant path there. And now it's time for the last call. I will let you start, Rock.
Yeah, man, it's like that time even when the casuals like me are getting back into college basketball. So for a ton of you actually have teams in it. Congrats. I'll be going for St. John's, which is like the first college team I ever really cared about when I was a kid. My mom went there for a little bit of time and got to see like Mullen play versus Patrick Ewing back in the day as a kid. So I have my rooting interest, and then just trying to somehow beat Moen in whatever random pool we do or don't pull together. I'm sure we'll do something for everybody who's in the community, even if the winning prize is just bragging rights.
Yeah, we'll post it on Twitter. We'll do a bracketology thing, and I'll somehow win. And I'll be like the asshole who never plays the lottery and then buys a $1 ticket one day and wins $6 billion. I'll just fill out that win $1 million on ESPN for a perfect bracket or something.
Think of all the sounders you can get with that prize, though.
Yeah, well, trust me, I'm retiring. I ain't doing this. I'll come on here just drunk all the time, man. I can afford all this.
As opposed to part-time drunk?
As opposed to part-time drunk. I'll go full-time. I'll make a profession out of it. I would like to say that tomorrow is St. Patrick's Day. I know a lot of people celebrate that and imbibe on that day. It's rather unfair that it's on a Monday, but if you do decide to drink, please do not drive. Call an Uber, call a cab, talk to the bar. Lots of bars offer free taxi service on St. Patrick's Day. Yes, they do. They will drive you home whenever you want to. So please do not drink and drive. And for the luck of the Irish, I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Again, please like and subscribe before you leave the channel here. It would certainly be appreciated. And Stormy Cyclone says he's wearing a Notre Dame hat. I'm not going to wear even green tomorrow. I don't even want to be confused for a Notre Dame fan, Stormy Cyclone. Not on my life.
No blue, no green for him tomorrow. He'll be wearing black.
Black. That's right. I'll be wearing black, and I'll be wearing a national championship hat from when Ohio State beat the Fighting Irish. I want to thank all of you for tuning in tonight. Go get those brackets filled out. I will get a pool set up on ESPN. I will put it on our Twitter at the CFB Mafia. I hope you all have a great evening. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you next Sunday.